This happened earlier in the year. I was on vacation in Costa Rica with my family, and one other family as well. Not counting me, the 17-year-old female, there were 3 other girls there, my sister Sophie of 14, my friend Julia of 15, and her sister Michaela of 11. Mac and Julia belonged to the other family. We were staying at a resort that had a massive pool. It was later at night, probably around 10ish, and our families decided that we were going to the pool for a swim. This was our second day, and we had gone on a volcano hike earlier, so we were looking forward to hanging out for a bit. The parents dashed off to the swimming bar that was up in one of the pools, and us kids decided we were going to go to the water slide, which was in a completely different area. I was the oldest and fairly responsible, as well as being a certified lifeguard, so the parents had little problem leaving me in charge of the rest of the girls. The 4 of us hung out in the pool, having a grand old time for a while. We all took turns going down the slide. It was kind of scary actually. And after a while, the 2 youngest ones, Sophie and Mac, went off to find the parents and hang out with them for a bit. Julia and I stayed to go down the slide a few times. The slide was set up so that there was a long set of gradual steps that would wind up the side of this hill thing and into another little pool at the top, near the top of the slide. On the far side of this pool, there were a few more steps that led to the actual entrance of the slide. There were only a few trees and bushes that separated the steps from the resort road. By the entrance to the slide, there were no trees or anything that you could access the entrance from the road from. To put it simply, we had an obscured view to the road and vice versa. Anyway, Julia and I were standing at the top of the slide waiting for the last little kid to go down before we went. The kid went, and we kind of stood up there for a bit, just talking and taking advantage of the lack of younger siblings, when we heard this motorcycle drive by behind us on the road. We turned around, and sure enough, a man on a motorcycle was just cruising down the street. We didn't think anything of it and went down the slide. When we came back up for another go, the man was just sitting on his motorcycle out on the road. He wasn't blatantly watching us, but when we turned to look, he would find something to do and look away. Julia and I are teenage girls, and we're in pretty good shape, so it was creepy but not super weird that this dude was looking at us. We went down the slide a few more times each, and this dude would drive up on his motorcycle. We were pretty creeped out at this point, so we left. Julia and her family went to their room, and me and my family went to ours. I was in the bed closest to the window, and so I was the only one in my room who saw a headlight or something drive up to our window. We were on the bottom floor, and I leaned over and pulled back the blinds a little because it was late, because I wanted to know who was blasting their headlights in. Sure enough, it was the motorcycle dude. I was quite shaken, so I woke up my dad, who went out onto the patio, and as soon as he saw him, because my dad stands at 6'1" and is 200 pounds, the motorcycle man sped off. I stayed close to my family for the rest of the trip. Needless to say, creepy motorcycle man peeping on underage girls, let's not meet.
In June of 2020, a TikTok user with the username UGHenry decided that he and a few friends would use TikTok to record themselves going on an adventure. It was an adventure that was based around the popular adventure app Randonautica. Upon opening the app, Randonautica asks you to share your location. Then it will ask you to choose which type of point you would like to generate, be it a void or an anomaly, before fetching coordinates using a random number generator. The user can then open that location in Google Maps to begin their journey. Randonautica adventures were something of a meme at the time, and many other TikTok users were uploading videos of themselves using the app. Given that some journeys had ended with some rather creepy occurrences, UGHenry decided to give Randonautica a try himself. And so Henry and his two friends spent their afternoon following a series of apparently randomly generated coordinates around their hometown of Seattle. The keyword they entered into Randonautica app was travel, so when the app pointed them in the direction of Alley Avenue Southwest, a street right next to the shoreline of Elliott Bay, they figured the ocean was their final clue. But when they arrived at their destination, they found something disturbingly relevant lying on the rocks near the water. It was a suitcase, and in particular, a travel case. Like many people at the time, Henry and his friends were almost convinced that there was a kind of magic at work with Randonautica. Scores of other randonauts found the endings to their journey to be far too fitting or poetic to be purely random or coincidental, and now Henry was one of them, and he had a potential viral video to go with it. But Henry's video was about to go viral for considerably more sinister reasons, because as they approached the travel case, they began to smell something rotten in the air, and the situation was about to take a decidedly dark turn. At first, Henry and his friends simply laughed off the smell, thinking it either came from one of them or from something washed up further down the beach. They continued to film the bag, with one of them prodding it a little before telling the others how heavy it seemed. One of the people in the video jokes about the contents being rotten groceries, hence the smell. But after another makes a quip about the contents being cash, it's only a matter of time before one of the friends decides to open the case. But as soon as they do, the god-awful stench in the air becomes even more intense, so much so that the friends begin retching and gagging off camera. It was only when they saw the stuffed trash bags inside the case that they began to fear the worst. And after calling 911 and having some cops check out the travel case, the worst fears were confirmed. Inside the travel case were 2 dead bodies, one male, one female. Ugg Henry wrote that he broke down the moment he got home after finding the suitcase. He added that his laughter in the video was his way of trying to get through the situation, and said he has since then been unable to sleep. The TikTok video of Henry's morbid discovery earned him more than 15 million views, and fueled the speculation that the Randonautica app was somehow cursed. But outside of the paranormal speculation, a very real investigation was launched into how these 2 dead bodies came to end stuffed inside of a travel case. According to a post-mortem examination performed by the King County Medical Office, based on the state of decomposition, 35-year-old Jessica Lewis and her 27-year-old boyfriend Austin Wenner were shot and killed on or around June 9th, just days before they were found. Police then set about questioning those closest to the couple, one of which was their landlord, 62-year-old Michael Dudley, who rented the top floor of his large home to them. On the night of their killing, neighbors reportedly heard a man yelling, "Please don't do this, just let me leave," before gunshots were fired. During his questioning, many of Michael's answers seemed inconsistent or cagey, and was overly nervous during the conversation when he apparently had no reason to be so. It was just enough for the police to focus their suspicions on him, and they quickly obtained a search warrant for the house that both Michael and the murdered couple called home. During their search, law enforcement discovered bullet holes in one of the walls, blood in the couple's bedroom, and a fresh coat of paint on a random part of a banister. When the police confronted him regarding their findings, Michael claimed that he'd heard Jessica had somehow managed to cut herself and denied the bullet holes even being there. He was promptly arrested, then taken to a holding cell to await further questioning. There has been plenty of media speculation as to why exactly Michael Dudley would shoot the young couple, but one source has suggested that the straw that broke the camel's back was their inability to make rent payments. Outside of that, there are plenty of skeletons in Michael's closet that suggest deep-rooted violent proclivities. One media outlet discovered a history of interfamilial relations and carnal abuse when they came across an assault restraining order filed against Michael by his own daughter in June of 2018. Some court documents are said to have read, "My father indecently assaulted me for 9 years, from age 10 until age 18, forcing me to share a bed with him from age 10 while he'd play adult movies on the TV. I don't feel safe in my home or leaving my home to work." His daughter also added that Michael had a very disturbing habit, a ritual in which he would take out his pistol and threaten to use it on her. Gina Yeshka, Jessica's aunt, said she was close with her niece before she died. Gina told the media that her knowledge of Michael Dudley more or less lines up with the allegations made by his daughter. Sometimes he would break their car so they couldn't leave, she said. He put trackers on people's cars. Anytime he ever got in a dispute with anybody, he would tell them to leave but try to lock them in the house. But most horrifying of all, according to Gina, Michael had another disturbing tendency: cruelty towards animals that couldn't protect themselves. He killed the dog in front of them and left the carcass outside for 3 days to scare them, Gina continued. They had nowhere to go. That's why they stayed there. He beat this dog to death with a hammer because it got one of his chickens. He just left it out there for the other dogs to look at and sniff. He's a freaking psycho. She also said the loss of her niece, a mother of 4, and her niece's longtime boyfriend has all but destroyed their families. I don't want them to be remembered in any violent way. I want them to be remembered for their humanity and their kindness. I want to believe they didn't suffer. Michael himself has been taken into custody, but evidence suggests that someone might well go unpunished for their involvement in Jess and Austin's murders. During the post-mortem of their dismembered bodies, the coroner observed that the slices and hacks around their joints were disorganized and appeared to be done in different manners with various devices. The police spokesperson also mentioned that after dismembering his victims, Michael had apparently set about dispersing their bodies in multiple bags throughout various bodies of water, and given the time frame and placement of the bags, it is unlikely that Michael did this alone. This means that there could well be someone just walking around Seattle, a free individual, who helped cut up and dispose of 2 innocent young people, a loving couple who could possibly have been executed over nothing more than a late rent payment. After his arrest, Michael's bail was set to $3 million, with the judge citing his willingness to commit horrific acts of violence. The process of dismemberment would have taken a lot of time and effort, and his willingness to take these extreme steps demonstrates the threat he poses to the community, charging documents read. It appears that Michael is indeed guilty of Jess and Austin's murder, and it's more than likely that he'll go to prison for a very long time. But it was TikTok that made them famous. Millions of people all over the world learned of such barbaric acts because of a simple video messaging app. Big tech companies like Facebook or Twitter might like to think that every so often social media brings a little light into our lives, yet it seems that every so often apps like TikTok can bring a little darkness into our lives too. For context, I am female and currently 21 years old, though at the time of this event I was 16 years old. I've never viewed myself as an attractive person. I've always been kind of chubby. I had bad acne in my teen years. I never cared at all what I wore, and I almost never wore makeup. I was an extremely awkward teen who had barely any friends and next to no self-esteem due to a very abusive relationship I had a few years prior, but that's a different story entirely. My point is that I was a completely different person during this time, and looking back, I know how naive I was and what I should have done instead to better protect myself. So it was the year 2015, and I was going on my very first cruise with my family. It was an 8-day, 7-nights cruise that was taking place a few days after a tsunami had passed nearby. After a rocky start, literally the boat rocked back and forth the first 2 days and everyone was miserable, and me suffering a slight panic attack during a routine evasion drill. I'm claustrophobic and really hate crowds. It ended up being one of the best weeks of my life, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Some of the downsides to this cruise was the fact that it was a North State cruise taking place in October, which meant chilly weather and no swimming, and because it was during a school year, I was the only guest my age on that cruise. The closest age to me, I think, was either 6 years old or 40 years old, so that kind of stunk, although I did end up crushing hard on our assistant dinner-time waiter who was around 30 years old and had the sweetest smile I'd ever seen. Anyways, time to get to the meat of the story. So as far as I know, most cruises have at least one formal night where everyone dresses up really nice for dinner and they serve special meals like lobster, steak, etc. As I said before, I wasn't the most attractive person out there, but I did doll myself up for this special occasion. I wore a turquoise knee-length dress, tan-colored high heels, my mom curled my blonde hair, and I put on some makeup that really made my blue eyes pop. I honestly did feel kind of pretty that night. Dinner was amazing and I finally got to try lobster tail for the first time. Loved it. I also, of course, made eyes and mildly flirted with our assistant waiter. I made him laugh because of how red my face would get whenever my dad called me out on it. So after our dinner, my family and I all decided to go our separate ways for the night. There was a bunch of events going on that each of us wanted to get to. Well, except for me, who spent most of the cruise finding random relaxing spots to sit and draw. I was, and I've always been, an avid artist. So anyways, after a couple of hours, I decided I wanted to find my dad for some reason that I don't exactly remember. My mom had told me that he was going to the karaoke thing going on, so I started making my way around the ship, looking for wherever this was happening at. That's when I met him. I noticed him staring at me, and at first it was flattering. Like I said, I was average looking and had next to no self-esteem, so having anyone of the opposite sex look at me and smiling made me feel good. He looked to be not too much older than I was and was dressed in a cruise employee uniform, so I decided to approach him and ask if he knew where the karaoke room was. His smile never left as I asked him, and in a thick Indian accent he told me that he didn't know, but that we could search together for it. I thought it was a little weird at first that he was an employee but didn't know where an event was taking place, but I brushed it off and thought it was possible for some newer employees to not know where everything was yet. So he and I started walking around the ship together and casually chatted while doing so. He told me his name was Felix and was 21 years old. He also, as I suspected, did recently start working for this cruise liner a few months ago. For the record, I did find him kinda cute and liked how comfortable he felt talking to me about his life. As we continued walking around, he told me about how he was born and raised in India, how his family was kind of poor, how rooster fights were illegal back home but he watched them anyways and stuff like that. I enjoyed listening to his stories about life in a different country, considering I've never been anywhere but America at this point in my life. We had eventually stopped looking for my dad and were just walking and talking together. We were now standing outside on the deck and leaning against the railing. I admired how beautiful and ominous the dark water reflected the stars. It was as if we were floating in the galaxy. It was completely beautiful. He then started telling me how lonely he was and how hard it is working on a cruise ship and watching hundreds of couples being romantic together while he has no one. I told him that I understood how he felt because I was also single and hated feeling alone. He looked at me and told me he was surprised that I don't have a boyfriend because of how beautiful I was. I blushed and looked away as I told him that most guys back home don't look at me twice, and he was surprised by that. You know that feeling when someone or something is behind you, and you can't see it, but you know you can sense it's there? Well, I felt something behind my head, and when I turned around to find out what it was, before I realized what was happening, Felix's face was right in mine, and he planted an unexpected kiss on me. I pulled back in surprise, and he asked me what I thought about it. I stuttered nervously and tried to think of a reply. Now, yes, I was a naive young person who was always looking positively at people, but I wasn't completely stupid. This was a 21-year-old stranger who was flirting with a 16-year-old girl. I also had the sudden realization that no one knew where I was or who I was with. Before I could even say anything, Felix started telling me how he knew of a couple of spots on this ship where we could be alone to do things together. I started panicking and really wanted to get away from him. Now, another fault of mine is that I'm way too nice for my own good, and I'm always afraid of hurting people's feelings or coming across as a mean person, even when I'm clearly in a dangerous situation. I'm still too friendly to everyone now, but nowadays, I have much more of a backbone and wouldn't have a problem telling someone like Felix to kindly screw off. But as I said, I didn't have that confidence back then, and I had no clue how to get out of the situation. Felix put his arm around my waist and started guiding me toward one of the areas he was talking about. I started stuttering. Maybe we shouldn't. We just met and we might get caught and you'd be in trouble and my father might be looking for me. I know that sounds dumb, but I was trying to make him think of ways where this could be bad for him, so it seemed like I was trying to look out for him. Don't judge me too harshly. He told me not to worry about it because people mess around with staff sometimes and their boss never finds out. That only made me panic even more. He leaned in for another kiss and I stupidly let him because I was scared of making him angry. After the long, uncomfortable kiss, I slightly turned away and told him I just wanted to keep looking at the night sky. He insisted that we should start messing around because we don't have much time together. I tried to hold back from crying at this point. And by the grace of the good Lord above, my phone suddenly made a noise and I noticed my father had texted me asking where I was. I tried to mask my relief, but I immediately told Felix that I had to get going because my dad was wondering where I was and that he was very protective of me. Felix showed his disappointment to me saying that, but then he asked me for my phone number. My heart sank and I gave it to him. Again, stupid young female who doesn't know how to say no. I'm aware of how foolish that was. It was a good thing I didn't give him a fake, though, because he immediately texted my number to prove its authenticity. Once I thought he was satisfied, I started saying goodbye and walking away. He grabbed my wrists and spun me back toward him and asked for a hug goodbye first. I sheepishly agreed and gave him a light hug. I wanted to start crying when he squeezed me tight and pulled me against his groin and asked if I could feel it, if you know what I mean. I quickly stepped away and sped walked towards my hotel room. I made sure he didn't follow me, and once I was safely inside my room, I hopped on my bed and started crying. Of course, I couldn't tell my parents about this because I would be in trouble for putting myself in this situation, or so I thought. I promise my parents aren't really like that. I know now that in reality my former Marine father would have tracked Felix down and let him know to never touch his daughter again. A few minutes into my cry, and my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number claiming it was Felix. I wanted to block him immediately, but again, stupidly, I was afraid that would anger him and he would somehow find me. So I answered him and we talked for a few minutes. We kept talking about how he wanted to see me again before I left the next day, which at this point I repeatedly thanked God for, and I kept telling him that it just wasn't possible because my parents didn't want me leaving my room for the rest of the night, which was a lie. I did eventually end up leaving my room and asked an older female employee where the karaoke event was, which she immediately took me to. Side note, the room was literally 2 hallways down from where I first found Felix, and I kicked myself for that later. I found my dad and didn't leave his side for the whole rest of the night. Luckily, I was able to enjoy the rest of my night dancing around with my father, and I did hide around him whenever I spotted Felix walking around, who was making it obvious that he was looking for me. I know the story isn't as scary as the most on here, but at the time, it was terrifying to me, and my own kindness could have got me into a very bad situation. The moral to my story is that everyone needs to be careful when going on cruises or other types of vacations. Just because someone wears an employee uniform doesn't mean they're trustworthy. There's many people out there who take advantage of kind people and want to use that against them. Just please make sure whoever you're with always knows where you are, and don't put yourself into risky situations.